So, I'm not there. In 2007, I'm Not There was released. Directed by Todd Haynes, the film was ambitious and bold, a biopic about Bob Dylan told through the gaze of 6 different characters and 6 different actors. More recently, a conventional Dylan biopic has been announced, with Timothée Chalamet set to play the cultural icon. However, when I first read this news, I couldn't help but think, but why? The perfect Dylan biopic has already been made. I'm Not There is flashy in its gimmick, but ultimately it's a true testament to Bob Dylan. It's complex, artistic, daring, and it isn't afraid to make its audience think, much like the work of Dylan himself. In an interview, Dylan acknowledged that Haynes didn't regard the audience's understanding of the film while making it, which is very fitting for the man who's still having YouTube video essays made about deciphering his music over 50 years after release. In this video, I'm going to delve into what each character represents in the film and why, if I speak so highly of this approach to the biopic, did it fail to revolutionize biographical films. The division of Dylan into 6 different characters isn't purely just a gimmick. I mean, sure, it's a bit of a gimmick, but the 6 characters each represent important moments in Dylan's career and life. Woody Guthrie, as the character is called, is a testament to Dylan's youth and his early obsession with the music of Woody Guthrie. The first song Dylan ever professionally recorded that he himself had written was Song to Woody. But the character also highlights Dylan's eagerness to break into the music scene. He famously ran away from home 17 times and was brought back 16. And we can see this in Woody's train-hopping ways. We follow him as he bounces around from place to place before finally reaching his destination, Woody Guthrie. And just a side note on the scene where he finally does meet Woody Guthrie, Todd Haynes makes a really interesting choice not to play Song to Woody, but instead play Blind Willie McTell. Both songs are dedicated to big figures of influence to Dylan, and I just liked how he didn't go for the obvious choice and instead went for Blind Willie McTell, even though both songs represent the same thing. Arthur Rimbaud portrays Dylan's cryptic philosophies that he would often dispel to the press instead of giving straightforward answers. Based off of another man Dylan greatly admired, this character gives the film's first glimpse into his relationship with the media, with the character constantly being interrogated whenever he is on screen. Jack Rollins showcases Dylan during his protest years, and later on during his born-again Christian years as well. Rollins is dismissed by the public when he makes controversial statements, and is only seen to be accepted once more when he becomes a pastor. This could be Haynes' way of implying that the audience who would have enjoyed Dylan's early traditional folk-based but lyrically modern songs, the types who shunned him upon going electric, re-emerged as fans after Dylan exited this phase and began showcasing his faith more in his music. Robbie Clark is all about the personal life of Dylan. The character has recently played Jack Rollins in a biopic, and instantly we can see how this relates to the fact that Robert Allen Zimmerman had to play Bob Dylan in the public eye.
That was a pawn in their game.
And his segment of the film largely charts the romantic relationship between Dylan and Sarah Lowndes, or Lowndes, I'm not sure how to say it. Although there is also a little bit of Suze Rotolo imagery implemented. Jude Quinn is possibly the most straightforward of any of these segments, and I expect the James Mangold film will likely act as an elongated version of this. It covers Dylan at the height of his fame, going electric and his renowned documented tour to England. Also during this segment we get more of Dylan versus the media, and in particular we meet Bruce Greenwood. And I'm just going to refer to him as Bruce Greenwood because although he plays 2 different characters in the film, both are representational of the same thing. The Jude Quinn segment of the film is in black and white, much like Don't Look Back, the documentary surrounding Dylan's tour to England, and is often cited as the highlight of the film, with Blanchett earning rave reviews for a terrific performance. The segment ends with the abrupt death of Quinn in a motorcycle accident, which in reality Dylan survived. But in the aftermath of this accident, Dylan rebranded himself and released a string of albums completely unlike those which preceded the accident. And finally, the Billy the Kid segment of the film addresses the period of Dylan's life when he was essentially in hiding from the public eye. The recurrent figure of Bruce Greenwood turns up again. Indicative of the press's unrelenting desire to pry into his life, this segment, I believe, covers the period in Dylan's life after he stopped touring following the motorcycle accident. After Greenwood appears, Billy feels somewhat hunted and like this once safe life isn't what it used to be, leading him to hop back on the train, where he finds Woody's old guitar and begins to play. This segment is potentially the most divisive in the entire film, but I think this final moment leaves the implication that this is representative of Dylan's return to touring in the 70s. The characterization of Richard Gere's character is probably the biggest hint given as to the time this segment represents. He's Billy the Kid, And in 1973, Dylan appeared in and scored Sam Peckinpah's Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. The following year, Dylan returned from an 8-year hiatus from touring for Bob Dylan and the Band tour. As you can see, this film isn't straightforward, far from it in fact. Todd Haynes embraced the fact that he was making a film about one of the most elusive figures in pop culture history, and wore it on the film's sleeve. In many ways, Haynes was the perfect pick for a film about Dylan. If you're unfamiliar with his work, Todd Haynes has always approached film in the lens of its time period. When he sets a film in a certain era, he aims to capture that era and evoke film from that time also. You can see this most obviously in his 2002 50s set, Far From Heaven, which pays obvious homage to the films of Douglas Sirk. With I'm Not There, Haynes set his sights on the 60s, which, as we all know, is instrumental in telling the story of Bob Dylan. Take even just the opening credits. Haynes makes the choice not to highlight Dylan within this sequence. Instead, we hear his music over images of the everyday 60s world. We see the people, we see the cities, we see the culture. All of this is important in informing the world of Dylan. We don't see the real man himself until after the film is finished, where we see archival footage of Dylan performing a harmonica solo. Think about how easy it would have been to have made the opening credits a montage of iconic moments and concert performances from Dylan's career. And much like how Haynes appropriated cinema of the 1950s in Far From Heaven, we can see him utilising the back catalogue of 1960s cinema in I'm Not There. The scenes with Ben Whishaw feel inspired by the overexposed look of 1960s television, and the composition and context evoke the documentary Point of Order. Scenes about Jack Rollins feel like a pastiche of documentaries such as No Direction Home, a modern documentary that heavily relied on footage similar to that recreated for this sequence. Cate Blanchett's segment draws upon 1963's 8½, 1967's Persona, and contains an oblique reference to the Beatles film A Hard Day's Night. In Heath Ledger's segment, we can see obvious traces of Godard throughout, but particularly the film Masculine Feminine. All of the scenes have a certain Godardian sense, however, and a comparison can be drawn between shots from the film and numerous Godard films. It's also interesting to note that a comparison could be drawn between Haynes' preference for utilising cinema of bygone eras in modern films, and the way in which Dylan himself adapted old melodies and guitar instrumentals to craft modern music. Not only does using motifs from cinema of the period make the film feel more grounded in that period's culture, but it also reflects on the subject of the biopic itself. So, you might be wondering, well, if this film was so great, why didn't it kickstart a biopic revolution? And the answer is pretty simple, unfortunately. The studio lost quite a bit of money on this film. Its production budget, which excludes the cost of marketing, distribution, etc., was $20 million. It made $11 million. When you compare this to some other musical biopics, you can really get a sense of how disappointing that return is. Walk the Line, released 2 years prior, grossed $187 million against 28. In some more recent examples, Bohemian Rhapsody made $900 million against 55, and Rocket Man made just shy of 200 against 40. To answer my own question at the beginning of this video, that is why a Timothée Chalamet Bob Dylan film is in the works. If you can make it in a more mainstream, appealing way, it's probably a hit along the lines of Walk the Line or Rocket Man. Maybe not quite Bohemian Rhapsody level, but that's reserved for a quality Beatles film. I have a feeling we're going to have to wait a long time for that.